In His Grip with Dr. Chuck Betters of Marking Ministries. Today we are reaching back into the archives. Today's message is titled, The Mother of All Prostitutes, from the series Unveiling and Understanding Revelation. Each message is designed to help turn your heart towards Jesus and equip you to walk by faith. Let's join Dr. Betters in the sanctuary.
We are in the next to the last parallel section in this book, and we'll be looking at Revelation chapter 17. Once again, be mindful of the fact that these parallel sections retell the same story of events between the first and the second comings of Jesus Christ. And they are told in parallel sequence, that is, progressively becoming more and more intense as the book unfolds, climaxing, of course, in this particular section with chapter 19 that speaks of the great marriage supper of the Lamb. But as we look at Revelation chapter 17, I believe we have a rich story that has its roots in Old Testament language. In fact, you really cannot understand Revelation 17. You cannot understand the history of Babylon and the rise and the fall of this, as it's called here, the mother of all prostitutes, unless you have a grasp for its history in the context of the Old Testament. So John, as he writes this vision, is presuming that his readers are familiar with the backdrop of Babylon. Now, in the days of the Persian Gulf War, we heard a lot about the rise of a new Babylon. We heard dictators like Saddam Hussein saying that they would rebuild the Babylonian gardens and bring Babylon out of its demise and put it back on the map, so to speak, and that we would see a rise of this new alignment of nations to stand against the peoples who represent the Judeo-Christian values of the Western world. Well, of course, there were preachers, I'm sure, by the thousands who were jumping on the bandwagon to say that we are now living in the last days. Most of them would be dispensationalists. That is, most of them would believe that the book should be read in some sort of chronological sequence, and any talk of a new Babylon, they would say, is talk of end times, and that's just not the case. In fact, as you study the Old Testament, you will see Babylon recurring again and again and again in different forms. I'll say from the very outset that when you come to Revelation chapter 17, the Babylon that John has in mind is none other than Rome. It's not called Babylon. It's called Babylon in a symbolic sense, but it's really the empire of Rome that John has in mind when he writes of this vision. It's in John's day the mother of all prostitutes. The Roman Empire and its persecution against the church was indeed, in that setting, the same as it was in the Old Testament setting when Israel was brought into slavery and bondage under the Babylonian Nebuchadnezzars and people like that. So let's take a look at Revelation 17, beginning with verse 1. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters. With her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a desert. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. This title was written on her forehead: Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Then the angel said to me, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and will come up out of the abyss and go to his destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life, from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because he once was, now is not, and yet will come." Now, oftentimes when you study Revelation, the symbols are decoded right in the book for you. You don't have to look elsewhere to find out what he's talking about. Such is the case here. He speaks of Babylon as being something that once was, now is not, but will come out of the abyss someday in the future. And he references the fact that those whose names are not written in the book of life from the creation of the world will be astonished at the rise and the demise of this particular beast. So in just a few verses, what John is doing, what God is doing for us in unveiling this vision, is to show us very simply that Babylon has been with us from the very beginning of time. It takes different forms and shapes and sizes. It takes on different aspects of government. The Assyrian Empire was, in every sense of the word, Babylon. The Medo-Persians were, in every sense of the word, Babylon. The Grecian dynasties, the Egyptian dynasties, the Babylonian dynasties, both the old Babylonians and the new Babylonians. All of these empires that persecuted the people of God in the Old Testament context formed the Babylon of Revelation chapter 17. In John's day, that Babylon was Rome. But there is coming a day toward the end of the age, before Christ comes back the second time, that there will be another Babylon that will rise out of the abyss. You remember in that one parallel section we talked about the locusts that come out of hell, that hell is unlocked, and these hellish creatures come out of the abyss and afflict and persecute the people of God, and there is great judgment as the result of that. Well, I believe that one world government system, that one Babylonian system, the seeds of that are in place right now. Now you say, is the government in place? No, I don't believe it is. But I believe the seeds for that one world system that I believe will be a combination of all of the empires, all of the Babylons that have gone before, that will launch its attack against the Church of Jesus Christ. And that will happen when the river Euphrates is breached, when the barriers between the Muslim and the Western world come down, and the Church of Jesus Christ slips into her apostasy. We find that we will leave the faith of our fathers, and the whole scenario that we have been talking about now for several months. But in John's particular case, you must address this as what we call the realized, but the not yet. Realized, it was Rome. The not yet is the one world government that will be coming, that will be a combination of all of the Babylons that have gone before. Well, now let's go back in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 10, because in order to understand the history of Babylon, you have to understand its roots. Now, we're going all the way back to the creation, or just after the creation, when God has made his covenant with Noah. The world has received its destruction. God has brought judgment through the flood. Now the earth is about to be replenished. God is about to send Noah and his family out to repopulate the earth after it has been destroyed. And we come to an interesting passage in Genesis 10 that gives us the clues and the insight into what Revelation 17 is all about. So when you come to Genesis 10, I'd like you to look with me at verse 10, an obscure verse. Let's start with verse 8. Cush was the father of Nimrod. Now you need to underline that man's name, Nimrod. who grew to be a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The first centers of his kingdom were, what's that next word? Babylon, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, and Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, Resen, which is between Nineveh and Calah, that is the great city. Now, who is this character, Nimrod? If you take the name of Nimrod in the Hebrew, see, Hebrew is written in consonants, and the pointing around the consonants forms the vowels. And most Hebrew is written without the vowels, that is, without the pointing. You just have to fill in the pointing as you're reading it. If you look at the name Nimrod, and you bring those consonants together, you have the name of the god Marduk. Now, Marduk was the god of Babylon. He was the one who made a name for himself. Nimrod is called here a mighty hunter. He is called a mighty hunter before the Lord, but in the context of the Hebrew language, that is a very negative thing to say. It is not before the Lord as an act of worship that he was hunting. It's before the Lord in the sense of competition. It's before the Lord in the sense of an antithesis. That is, Nimrod stood before the Lord in opposition to the Lord, and he became the god of the Babylonian religion. He is none other than Marduk. His wife was Semiramis. In fact, if you go to Cairo, Egypt today, you will find a hotel named after Semiramis. It's the Hotel Semiramis. Marduk and Semiramis were the ancient god and goddess of Babylon. Now, they had a son who Semiramis claimed was virgin-born. And she became, along with her son, the first mother-son cult of Babylon. I think you can see even all the way back to Genesis chapter 10, Satan, in his pursuit of the seed of the woman, was establishing the counterfeit virgin birth. All the way back to Genesis chapter 10, when the Babylonian tower was built, when the tower that the nations of the earth formed to approach God on their terms, that is, to create their own religion. That Tower of Babel, that very first act of rebellion after the flood, forms the basis of this mother-son cult right out of the kingdom of hell. A clever satanic ploy to discredit the virgin birth and the coming seed of the woman. So this ancient mother-child cult spread to Egypt. In Egypt, it was called Isis and Osiris. It spread to Greece. In Greece, it was called Venus and Adonis. The Hindu religions call it Ushas and Vishnu. In Jeremiah, Israel is warned against offering sacrifices to the Queen of Heaven, that is, to Nimrod and Semiramis. So this ancient Babylonian religion goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 10, immediately after the flood, this mother-child cult. And Nimrod was the founding father of that cult in Babylon. Now, as you watch the history of the Old Testament unfold, you will see that Nimrod's religion takes on different forms and different governments and different sizes and shapes. Sometimes it is actually called Babylon. At other times, it's the Medo-Persian Empire or the Assyrian Empire. But in every case, in every one of those examples, all the way through the Old Testament, and yes, all the way through the New Testament, culminating in Revelation chapter 18, that is the destruction of the mother of all prostitutes, Babylon is always, listen carefully now, Babylon is always equated with or the same as that which lures the church out of its obedience to God and into the world, eventually bringing her into slavery. In fact, in the Old Testament, the great weeping prophet, Jeremiah warned and warned and warned of the compromise of Israel that eventually led to her bondage. The whole book of Daniel speaks of the reign of the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar and his rule over the people of God as he brought them into slavery. Babylon in the Old Testament is synonymous with hatred and persecution and compromise that lures the church into a state of apathy and complacency and eventually into shackles. And so when we look at the life of Nimrod, I believe we will have some very close parallels to the coming of the Antichrist. Now, I do not know, and I know there's considerable debate on this. I do not know whether the Antichrist will be one person or one system of persons. I don't think we can categorically say that the Antichrist will be one actual figure. He very well may be. In fact, when the Antichrist is spoken of in Scripture, he is often referred to in that context of being a one individual. But oftentimes, as we have studied apocalyptic literature, we become aware of the fact that even though it may speak of one person, it may mean an entire system, as is the case of the mother of all prostitutes in Revelation 17. It's obviously not one person, but a whole system that pervades the whole Old Testament. But now when you go back to Genesis and you look at Genesis chapter 10, you have this movement of repopulating the earth right after the flood. But now it's interesting if you go over to chapter 11. And you come to chapter 11, you have the building of the Tower of Babel, or Babel, whichever you prefer to call it. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As men moved eastward, they found the plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them together thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar instead of mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth." Now you know the rest of the story. Verse 5, the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building. The Lord said, as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their languages so they will not understand each other. So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there, the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Now we have this story. Nimrod, the father of the Babylonian cult. Nimrod, the mighty warrior. Nimrod was the spearheader of this movement to build this tower. And this was an act of rebellion. In fact, the name Nimrod means rebellion. His very name, Marduk, in the Hebrew means rebellion or rebel. But now Genesis chapter 10 and Genesis chapter 11 give us the preview for something else that God is doing. When you come to Genesis chapter 12, what do you see? The Lord said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, your father's household, and go to the land that I will show you." Now you have the call of Abraham. And you have this story of Nimrod just prior to the call of Abraham, who would be leading his people into the promised land. Now I'd like to suggest to you that what we have in Nimrod is a type of the Antichrist of the end times. I would like to suggest to you that Nimrod and the Antichrist type each other as you study Old and New Testament. Men in the post-flood world were seeking to glorify and to deify themselves. We read that. Let us make a name for ourselves. The devilish work of Nimrod precedes the call of Abraham to the promised land. So will it be in the last days with the work of the Antichrist, of which Nimrod is a shadow. The name Nimrod means rebel or rebellion. When you read 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, the Antichrist is called the rebel or the lawless one or the man of rebellion. The form of Nimrod's rebellion was to lead an open revolt against God. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, that is, in opposition to the Lord. And when you read the description of the work of the Antichrist in Daniel chapter 11, you'll see it says the king will do as he pleases. That's the Antichrist will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. He will be successful until the time of God's wrath is completed. For what has been determined must take place. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers or for the one desired by women, nor will he regard any god, but he will exalt himself above them all. Sounds like Nimrod. Sounds exactly like the god of Babylon. Notice in Genesis passage, the word Nimrod is given a descriptive term. He's the mighty Nimrod. The word mighty there is used in 2 Thessalonians 2 and verse 9 to describe the Antichrist. The lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan, displaying all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders. The Antichrist will be a mighty one. He's called a hunter. By the way, the Jewish Talmud, which comments on this particular passage, refers to him not as a hunter of animals, but a hunter for the souls of men. He is one who preys upon the souls of men. And the psalmist describes the movements of Antichrist as, "You destroy those who tell lies, bloodthirsty and deceitful men the Lord abhors." Nimrod was a king who desired an empire. We read that in Genesis chapter 10 because he went to Assyria where he built what? Nineveh and Rehoboth and Ur and Kala and Rezin. He desired for himself an empire that he would be the king over. The beginning of that kingdom was Babel or the Babylonian kingdom. Daniel refers to the work of Antichrist as the work of a king. He refers to the Antichrist as a king over an empire. Nimrod's headquarters were in Babylon. In Isaiah chapter 14, the Antichrist headquarters will be in Babylon. Nimrod's supreme desire was to exalt himself above God. 2 Thessalonians 2:4 tells us that the primary desire of the Antichrist will be to exalt himself above God. Nimrod was from the line of Cush. Cush, one of the sons of Ham, who was the son of Noah. You say, what's that have to do with anything? Ham was one of the cursed sons of Noah. So Nimrod came literally out of the cursed lineage of Noah. He was a product of the curse. So will the Antichrist be a cursed individual. Go over to 2 Kings chapter 25. 2 Kings chapter 25. You had the privilege, and I say privilege because in the kind of society in which we live, the high-tech society in which we live, there's a lot of things we see that if they had those same kinds of conveniences in the Old and New Testaments, a lot of the scriptures would have come to light. I want to read a passage to you to show you the spirit of Babylon. How did these people think? How did a Babylonian king think? How did those generations that came after Nimrod think? What was their mindset? What did they do when they went into battle? You know, as I read this passage in 2 Kings chapter 25, I couldn't help but think, I wonder what we watched back in August of 1990. I wonder what we observed back then with the invasion of Kuwait and what happened as the result of that. And then we heard Saddam Hussein standing up and saying, he wants to rebuild the Babylonian gardens. You can't help but think as you read this passage that the mindset of Nimrod is still alive. These people do not think in terms of godliness. These people think in terms of destruction and rebellion and lawlessness. So look with me at 2 Kings chapter 25. I'd like to read beginning with verse 1. So in the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, marched against Jerusalem with his whole army.
Thank you for listening to In His Grip, a ministry of Mark Inc. You just listened to the first part of Dr. Better's message titled, The Mother of All Prostitutes, from the series Unveiling and Understanding Revelation. You can download the full sermon at www.markinc.org. Visit us online at markinc.org, where you will find many free resources that offer help and hope to the hurting. Please help us keep In His Grip on the air with your gifts. Visit markinc.org, where you can safely give, or call us toll-free at 877-MARK-INC. No gift is too small. Thank you for listening and for your support.